Tonight on Bay Area Psychology, we explore a newly recognized intelligence, emotional intelligence. We will base much of our discussion on Daniel Goleman's bestseller, Emotional Intelligence. Goleman points out that we have all known people with an annoying lack of social graces. People who don't seem to know when to end a conversation and keep talking, oblivious to all cues and hints to say goodbye. People whose conversation centers on themselves all the time, who ignore attempts to refocus to another topic. People who intrude or ask nosy questions. Psychologists have coined the term dysthymia for what amounts to a learning disability in the realm of non-verbal messages. This can lead sufferers to feel less than human, like a computer, or somehow alien or different from others. Well, we are fortunate tonight to have Rosemary Tisch, founder of Kids Are Special and Family Education Foundation, and Joan Kilbourne from the San Jose State University Disability Program. I want to thank you both for being here with me tonight.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate your willingness to come and talk about this best-selling book. Because it's, I know it's on the top 10 charts, and I know a lot of people who've been reading it, and I found it a lot of fun. So I appreciate your willingness to come and tell us about it. Okay, I wanted to go ahead and start off, and if you could, have one of you, both of you, describe to us what is, what's new about labeling emotional intelligence. How is it different from IQ kinds of intelligence?
Sounds like a university question to me.
You're going to give me that. The idea of calling emotions, or anything about emotions, some form of intelligence is really a new idea. It's almost as if we thought of emotion as contrary or opposite to what we think of as intelligence or IQ. One of the big changes that's happened in the last 10 years is the idea of intelligence is no longer thought of as a single blob that you either have high intelligence or average or low. We're learning that there are multiple intelligences. And that idea leads us to see that some people have strength in some intellectual areas and weakness in others, and that would be a normal kind of pattern. And now we're looking at another kind of intelligence. The suggestion that Daniel Goleman makes is that emotional intelligence is another kind of intelligence that can be considered to have impact on the more cognitive forms of thinking.
Well, and in fact, he makes the point that you know, when they do long-term studies with people who graduate from universities, you know, the people who maybe have the best GPAs wind up not doing as well in their work performance as maybe people who may have scored a little lower, but seem to be a little more in touch with the people around them and able to negotiate social situations.
I think one of the things that fascinated me about the book was that IQ is something that you're born with. And his statement that this is, you know, here's a factor that we can affect. It's something we can change with parenting, with school-based programs, with some awareness. This is an area you can look at these different parts of it and say, okay, you know, this is one area I don't have as much skill here. I can learn it. Or if you look at a child, kindergarten, first grade he's talking about, this child does not have these skills, and there are programs available right now that we can add to the school curriculum or parents can do at home and make a difference.
So it's not, as you were mentioning before, the thought was you were either bright or you
That's
weren't.
Right.
Now, he talks about 7 different types of intelligence, and I believe that's something you have an expertise in. I'm wondering if you could sort of summarize that for us.
Howard Gardner proposed the idea that we have 7 kinds of intelligence, each one that operates separately. The verbal intelligence or verbal linguistic intelligence is one, the ability to use language, to listen and understand speech and read easily. There's musical intelligence, there's visual spatial intelligence, the ability to make sense of our visual world. It's easier to think of artists who are visual learners, but also engineers and architects have those skills. There's mathematical intelligence, logical intelligence, and then there are the 2 personal intelligences. Intrapersonal meaning knowing yourself, and interpersonal is knowing other people, being empathetic with others. Those 2 personal intelligences are pretty close to what Goleman's talking about as emotional intelligences. And then the last one is kinesthetic. That's the body's ability to learn. We think of actors and dancers and athletes, a mime who tells you what they're thinking by using their body.
Okay. In fact, you know what might be helpful at this point is to go to our first graphic that really outlines this emotional or intuitive intelligence you're talking about. Let's take a look. It's right there. Knowing one's emotions, self-awareness, recognizing a feeling as it happens. Or managing emotions, handling feelings appropriately to the situation. Motivating oneself, emotional self-control, the ability to delay gratification and stifle impulses. Okay, let's talk about those first three before we go on to the next two, and I have them in front of me. In terms of knowing one's emotions, you're talking about when looked at the 7 different types of intelligences, that somehow knowing how our own thoughts and our own intuition, how important that is.
That's one of the intelligences Gardner talked about, was the intrapersonal, knowing your own self. People who have a strong intelligence in that area monitor their own thinking, their own learning style. They're very independent learners. They even formulate their own moral code and live by that. They're very, very independent, self-sufficient. And so a person who has a real intelligence in that area would probably do pretty well what that first
Have a sense of feeling it as
ability.
it happens.
You know, and one of the things you mentioned, I started the Kids Are Special program, so we have worked a lot with children of alcoholics and addicts. So we're looking at children coming from traumatic homes. Often there's neglect and there's physical abuse and sometimes there's sexual abuse, so these children have not nurturing early childhoods. And one of the things he talks about is the importance of that early childhood. And what we saw at Kids Are Special was that a lot of the children did not have the ability to even know what they were feeling. That a few of them would say, I know mad, I know sad, I know happy, and that's it. And what we would start doing when working, and our program would qualify for one of the ones he talks about, is we would start saying, what kind of feelings do other people have? Not even that you got to have them, but what are the other feelings that people might have? We might have to get books out, we might have to get pictures out, and begin to just start a list of feelings. And some of the schools use, there's charts of faces, and this is a face of someone that feels this way or that way. So there's a true way of teaching this that takes time. But it can be done, that you start teaching what is a feeling, what is it like when you have a feeling. You mentioned the body, you know, where do you feel the different feelings in your body, because some of them you tend to feel in one place or another. One of the things I heard, and we talked about it this morning, that's in the book though that I kind of wonder about, is he questions the importance of venting anger,
yes,
and of the crying that may not have the same, he talks about the importance of journaling, and when he talks about medical aspects. So that's a different piece on this that I caught, and I thought, now that's intriguing. Now certainly venting in the sense of domestic violence, that's not going to help anything.
Right.
But I've always felt like it was important to express anger appropriately, and that's kind of left me kind of questioning some of this.
That's, we had a show recently on anger management. And our guest at that time, Beth Kotkin, talked about the latest research with anger, and talked about the findings of a lot of the research is showing that when you begin to vent or have catharsis, what it does is continue that feeling.
That's what he's saying.
On and on to the point where it is not helpful. And in fact, moving into solutions seems to help people feel more competent. And that ties to one of the points that that goes with emotional intelligence, was this idea of handling feelings appropriately to the situation. That it isn't just, do I know, do I have a feeling, but where do I go with that?
Right.
Because part of that not knowing, I know in my clinical work, in my practice, I'll see people who, because they can't identify their feeling, they'll wind up sort of putting it in a different direction or misdirecting it. It's the classic, I'm mad at my boss, so I kick the dog. Kind of lack of awareness about that. Let's take a look at the next two components before our break here. Recognizing emotions in others, empathy, tuned in to social signals, and we'll touch back on that in a minute, and handling relationships, skills in managing the emotions of others, a sense of social competence. Okay, so you were mentioning sometimes if you're not identifying your own feelings, you can develop empathy for
Right.
identifying the feelings of others, and that's part of emotional intelligence, is being able to recognize that people around you are having reactions and feelings. Have you worked in your program with people with this particular component?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the joys. Because even in their adulthood, we work with college-age students, and college age now is anywhere from 20 to 65 or over. We work with adults who haven't still learned how to recognize what's going on in them, and they get excited and angry to a point that they no longer can control how they think or think about what the situation is, and they act inappropriately. They get into a lot of trouble because adults aren't treated with the same kind of tolerance that a child is when they're out of control. You can be angry briefly with the child or punish them or talk to them, but when an adult does something like that, has a tantrum, as it were, that's just not acceptable behavior, and so we still encounter people who haven't quite figured that out. They don't seem to understand when anger is starting to happen to them. They don't recognize it coming, and when they get caught up in it, it just overwhelms them. They no longer can think.
Well, and the other piece of that is not recognizing the impact that we're having on other people.
Right.
No,
So
not
I
at
might
all.
say, well, I'm just making a point, and I'm not recognizing that what I'm doing is perhaps intimidating you. Okay, I'm just seeing
Yes.
myself as arguing my point.
Well, and he takes this further into looking at violent acts. And takes it all the way into the fact that someone that is committing violent acts has no sense of fear themselves. He talks about some of the research on that, and therefore cannot understand fear in their victims, cannot understand what's happening. And some of the treatment strategies now for batters or offenders is to start working on the empathy side of this.
Right, and recognizing impact.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. When we return, we'll turn our attention to things we can do to address this painful problem. Welcome back. Well, when we left, we were looking at the the components of emotional intelligence. What I'd like to do is turn our attention next to the costs of emotional literacy, of not having these particular skills. And you alluded to some of them on a college campus. Let's look. Withdrawal or social problems, feeling anxious and depressed, maybe developing attention or thinking problems, perhaps even delinquent or aggressive behavior. Okay, so in terms of withdrawal or social problems, have you, in your program you developed, or at San Jose State, have you worked with people who are aware, perhaps, that they're not very well tuned into other people, or do you think they're just oblivious to that?
I think the younger children are not totally aware. You know, that's first